When audiences first met Shrek back in 2001, what hit them wasn't just the humor or Eddie Murphy's amazing donkey. It was actually how real everything looked. For the first time, a fully digital world didn't just look like a cartoon, it felt touchable. You could practically smell the mud, feel the damp grass underfoot, and imagine what it would be like to flop into Shrek's swampy bath. That believability came down to tech breakthroughs that DreamWorks and PDI poured years into, especially with water and mud. The swamp wasn't just a flat green texture painted onto the ground. It was powered by PDI's FLU system, a fluid simulator that let animators control gooey mud, splashing beer, dripping swamp water, and sloshy puddles. Instead of faking it with static textures, the FLU system gave the swamp the messy chaos of real liquid, particles that splattered, waves that rippled when characters stepped in, and mud that clung to bodies. The animators even broke big mud pits into smaller sub-simulations so they could get close-up detail without overloading computers. And here's where it got really clever. Wetness wasn't just in the mud. Characters and props could actually look soaked. They used wet maps, essentially invisible layers that told the renderer, this patch of cloth is damp now. Water seeped in and left darker patches. This can sound obvious now, but at the time it was groundbreaking. Animated films before Shrek often treated liquids as background effects, something composed after the fact. But here, mud and water interacted with characters, leaving traces, splashes, and grime that stayed consistent across shots. The swamp was also a playground for foliage sims. Grass bent with wind, cattails bobbed in the breeze, and leaves didn't just float like paper. They actually twisted and tumbled with the flow of air. Behind the scenes, a combination of fluid simulations and oscillation controls made every plant react in a way that looked natural, never robotic. If the swamp made Shrek's world messy, the characters' hair, fur, and clothes kept them believable. Just think about Donkey. Without fur that shifted with every step, he'd look like a shiny toy horse. Instead, he had fuzz that caught the light and moved when he shook his head. Or Fiona. Her dress didn't just stretch and shrink. It flowed, wrinkled, and bounced as she fought merry men or ran through forests. This realism came from two main systems, Strand and Coif. Strand was the hero system, used on big, expressive features like Shrek's ears, Fiona's long hair, and Donkey's tail. It let animators strike a balance between hand-keyed motion and simulation. If Fiona's braid needed to swing dramatically in one shot, animators could keyframe it. But if they just wanted it to settle naturally after a jump, they could let the simulation take over. It was like having the best of both worlds, precise control and organic chaos. Coif, meanwhile, handled the generic stuff, background characters' hair or simpler hairstyles that didn't need star treatment. It was cheaper and faster, but still gave enough motion that nobody looked like a plastic doll. Coif was especially important for crowd shots in Duloc or at the wedding, where hundreds of characters had to look alive without draining rendering farms for months. Clothing was just as important. Tight outfits like Shrek's tunic or Lord Farquaad's regal getup used non-dynamic wrinkle systems. These wrinkles could be art-directed to look natural at certain poses, but didn't need full-blown simulation. For skirts, capes, or kilts, though, dynamics were key. When Fiona twirled, her dress swished. When Duloc guards marched, their armor straps jiggled. Again, the team mixed hand controls with simulation to keep it consistent but flexible. Fur got its own special treatment. Donkey's fur was simulated with geometry shaders, thousands of tiny fake hairs rendered as little triangular cheats that caught light correctly. This gave him a fuzzy, touchable look without overwhelming the rendering farm. Shrek's stubble, Fiona's eyelashes, even the grass in his yard used variations of this system. If mud, hair, and cloth made Shrek's world physically believable, lighting made it emotionally convincing. They had a handful of rules that guided the whole film. First, keep it real. Even in a stylized fairy tale world, light had to behave like real light. Shadows had to fall consistently, colors had to bounce off nearby surfaces, and firelight had to flicker just enough to feel alive. Second, keep it rich. Scenes weren't just lit by one source. They layered multiple lights to give depth and texture. Third, sweat the values. Every shot was carefully balanced for contrast, brightness, and saturation so the eye knew exactly where to look. And finally, shape, shape, shape. Light was used like a sculpting tool, carving Shrek's bulky body out of the dark swamp or softening Fiona's face to highlight her emotions. Each realm in the film had its own palette. Shrek's swamp was warm and earthy, full of browns and greens, with light cutting through mist to create atmosphere. Duloc, on the other hand, was sterile and overlit, artificially perfect, with hard shadows and bright primaries that echoed theme park fakery. The forests mixed in cooler greens and soft shadows, making them feel enchanted but grounded. Dragon's Keep leaned heavily into reds and harsh contrasts, playing up the danger with firelit halls and deep, oppressive shadows. This wasn't just point lights and call it a day. Lighting rigs could have up to 100 lights per shot. Firelight often doubled as an interactive source. Torches not only lit walls but reflected off armor or Donkey's wet fur. Even Fiona's hair caught subtle rim lights that helped define her silhouette in action scenes. The lighting team worked hand in hand with surfacing and shading. Shrek's tunic, for example, wasn't just a green patch. It had a velvet shader that caught highlights differently depending on angle, making it look soft, yet worn. Skin shaders layered translucency, so Fiona's cheeks glowed faintly when backlit. Hair caught specular highlights, bouncing light realistically across strands. And let's not forget matte paintings. Instead of modeling every mountain, the team often projected hand-painted backdrops into 3D space, then lit them digitally to blend with the scene. This gave them cinematic scale without breaking budgets. Behind all this swampy mud, flowing hair, and moody lighting was a production pipeline that kept 275 artists from losing their minds. Shrek wasn't made linearly. It was a giant juggling act, with departments passing shots back and forth like a relay race. It started with storyboards and story reels. Once a sequence was approved, rough layout artists blocked cameras and simple versions of characters. Final layout then swapped in the real models, adjusted cameras, and dressed sets with props. From there, shots branched. Character animation, effects, and lighting all took their turns. Animators had proprietary tools that gave them hundreds of controls for facial expressions, body poses, and timing. They roughed out sequences to check continuity before layering in fine details like smirks or eyebrow twitches. Once animation was approved, effects artists added mud splashes, fire, smoke, or cloth sims. Finally, everything came together in lighting and rendering. Lighters combined models, textures, shaders, effects, and matte paintings, fine-tuning dozens of lights per shot. Rendering was done on a farm of a huge number of CPUs, a serious setup for 2001. Shots often took hours, sometimes days, to render a single frame. The infrastructure also handled crowds. Instead of building unique models for every Duloc citizen, PDI created a small library of generic base characters, mixed and matched to create dozens of unique roles, with mix-and-match bodies, heads, clothes, and hair. Shaders added variation in skin tone, fabric type, and color, while procedural rules ensured no two characters looked identical. The beauty of this pipeline was flexibility. Directors could ask for late changes, and the pipeline allowed departments to update assets without redoing everything from scratch. That adaptability kept the film coherent, even as scripts, gags, and visuals evolved during production. Looking back, these systems seem quaint compared to today's hyper-advanced pipelines. But in 2001, they were truly revolutionary. They balanced control and chaos, letting artists push technology while still hitting deadlines. And the result? A film that didn't just look polished, it looked touchable. Shrek's swamp felt slimy, Donkey's fur felt fuzzy, Fiona's dress felt silky, and every torchlit corridor glowed with atmosphere. It was a fairy tale built from zeros and ones, but one you could almost step into. Shrek stood out not just for its humor or characters, but for how it made computer animation feel real. Through detailed simulation, lighting, and texture, DreamWorks created a believable, tangible world. Even though the tech seems simple now, the idea still sticks. The best CGI isn't about flashy effects. It's about making fantasy feel real and believable. Thanks for watching Collider. See you next time.